After 2 years of conflict and several failed attempts to bring about peace to Ethiopia's Tigray region, the government has finally agreed to an African Union peace mediation process. The announcement made within the week to take place in South Africa will be the first of formal negotiations between both sides since the outbreak of the war in November 2020. Rwanda Hussein, the National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, said or wrote on Twitter there is a need to have talks without any preconditions. So far, no confirmation has been made if the People's Liberation Front or the TPLF forces will take part in these talks slated for this weekend. Today, we intend to find out what will be or is this peace process the final route to peace in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Stay with us. Hello Africa and the world, thank you immensely for joining us on this last edition for the week of Voice Sit over your Pan-African channel For You Media Africa, where today we are discussing the Tigrayan crisis that the Ethiopian government has finally agreed to a peace mediation process, something that is going to put a stop to the 2 years of conflict which erupted in November 2020. Of course, I'll be joined this afternoon by Rwandan or Dr. ASONG KHUMBAH, who is a lawyer with the Rwandan Bar Association. Good day, sir. Good day to you, Dr. ASONG KHUMBAH. Thank you immensely for joining. Just to reiterate, you are a lawyer with the Rwandan Bar Association.
Yes, thank you. And also a lawyer of the East African Law Society.
Thank you so much for the clarification. We shall equally be joined by SHITTU, who is the digital NJIX editor, and he shall be joining us all the way from Nigeria. Before we proceed and get down to today's topic of discussion, I invite you all to listen to this report selected by the news desk of For You Media. Take a listen. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get down to discussions this afternoon, we're first going to take a listen to this report compiled to us by the news desk of For You Media. By the African Union to participate in peace talks aimed at ending a 2-year conflict with rival Tigrayan forces, the Prime Minister's National Security Advisor said on Wednesday. Tigrayan forces are yet to respond to the invitation for talks this weekend in South Africa, which will be the first formal negotiation between the two sides since the outbreak of war in November 2020, to diplomatic sources revealed. According to Rwanda Hussein, the National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who wrote on Twitter, the Ethiopian government has accepted his invitation, which is in line with our principled position regarding the peaceful resolution of the conflict and the need to have talks without preconditions. Reports reveal that the African Union Commission Chair Musa Faki Mahamat also invited Debretsion Gabriel Michael, who leads Tigray's ruling political party, to the talks in a letter. The letter, which was dated October 1st, but Gata Shaw read as a spokesperson for Debretsion Seekers People Liberation Front, said on Tuesday he was not aware of any imminent talks. The TPLF said last month it was ready for a ceasefire and will accept an African Union-led peace process after previously raising objections to AU proposals. Olusegun Obasanjo, the African Union High Representative to the Horn of Africa, will lead the negotiations with support from Kenyan former President Uhuru Kenyatta and former South African Deputy President Mumsuvi Mlambo-Nguka, according to the AU letter. Fighting resumed on August 24 after a 5-month ceasefire between March and August, where Prime Minister Abiy's government accuses the TPLF of trying to reassert Tigrayan dominance over Ethiopia. The TPLF forces accuses Abiy of over-centralizing power and oppressing Tigrayans. That is a report compiled to us by the news desk of For You Media. Okay, sir, I'm going to comment with you this afternoon. We have heard of this desire to negotiate peace in Ethiopia regarding the Tigrayan crisis that has been ongoing there in the Horn of Africa. But this is a conversation we have heard before. Do you think this recent zeal to bring about peace in Ethiopia's Tigray region is actually sincere?
Well, as a matter of fact, there are already humanitarian crises in the Tigray region. And I think that with all these humanitarian crises, violation of human rights, violation of women's rights, violation of children's rights, it is very important for the two parties to sit down and resolve the problem. So before I go into details, I want to give a brief understanding of how this problem started. So actually, when President Abiy Ahmed took power in 2019, when the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front lost power to his own party, which is the Prosperity Party, he had a vision to stop ethnic federalism and to stop ethnic nationalist policies. So we have to remember here that according to the Ethiopian Constitution of 1995, Ethiopia is a federal democratic republic and it has 9 states. And it is the organization of the state is that there is a federal state and there are 9 member states. And each of these states has a legislative body, an executive body, and a judiciary. So when the Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front lost power in 2019, it's worth mentioning that the Tigray People Liberation Front was majority in this party. Abiy Ahmed decided to stop ethnic or to reduce ethnic federalism. So he brought all the parties together into his own party, the Prosperity Party. But unfortunately, the Tigray People Liberation Force refused to join that Prosperity Party. So since they had lost, they went back to their region and continued governing there as one of the member states of Ethiopia. So normally elections were supposed to be organized sometime in 2020. And it so happened that the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed decided to actually postpone these elections to 2021 due to COVID. So this actually led the Tigray People Liberation Front to be disgruntled, and they decided to organize their own elections sometime in September 2020. So that is how the conflict started, and that is when they started now with their own Tigray Defense Force. They started attacking the Ethiopian National Defense Force, and that is how we find ourselves today. So it's sprouted from an ideology, a vision of uniting and bringing all ethnic groups together and stopping ethnic federalism, and also the fact that elections were not be conducted as they were supposed to be conducted. So we actually see that in this type of situation, it's really quite complicated, and each party has a point it is trying to make. But nevertheless, these parties have to sit together and resolve the issue, because one of the main hindrance to development in Africa, one of the main causes of humanitarian crisis in the world and in Africa are armed conflicts like we have in this case. So automatically, to be able to combat these things, to stop all these humanitarian crises and to prosper development, automatically we have to seek solutions as are being provided by the UN Charter of 1945 in its Article 33 to 38, which actually encourages all states where there is a conflict to always bring peace, and that should go through negotiations, mediation, conciliation, or even arbitration, or in any other manner that is possible with the aim of bringing peace to the region. So I believe that due to the fact that they have even accepted to sit on the table and discuss, I believe it's something very positive. And at the end of the day, by God's grace, we'll have a peaceful solution and calm will come back to Ethiopia and the Tigray region.
Exactly, that's what every person across the African continent is hoping with in relation with other conflicts that are happening across Africa. Now, according to the Tigrayan People Liberation Front, the TPLF forces, the Ethiopian government has always been provoking them at all fronts. Now we have seen this in recent attacks, as it has been reported. So now we are now seeing this problem of trust deficit being evoked when it comes to bringing about this conflict to a table. Now, how do you think both parties can resolve their differences in order for peace to reign?
Yeah, of course, when there is a conflict, it implies that the parties don't agree or they have not come to a compromise with regards to the main elements of their dispute. But nevertheless, I think the best way to go about this is a comprehensive approach, like parties changing their mindsets, parties getting to know the problems that each other one faces and what they really desire. And at the end of the day, they will be able to come up with a compromise, and that compromise will permit that there should be some sort of peace and stability in the region. So as I earlier said, that the issues that we are having in this conflict is that, first of all, the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed wanted to stop ethnic federalism. So that is a real problem, because most of our African countries are being divided into tribes or villages, and automatically people conserve their tradition, people conserve their way of life, their culture. So you cannot come on a particular day and say you want to stop ethnic federalism or you want to stop ethnic nationalist spirit. That would be very complicated, because you are like imposing a particular way of doing things on others, and when you do that, automatically the others are going to rebel against you. So I think that the only way they have to go about this is that the Ethiopian government, the federal government, and the member state of Tigray, they have to sit down and understand themselves. And I think that the main thing with the Tigray people is that the federal government is looking for a means to be able to stop ethnic federation, and that is not something possible, because you can't impose your way of doing things upon others. You first of all have to reach an agreement with them, and when you are able to reach this agreement with them, they might either accept or they might either refuse. But it is quite dangerous to actually try to stop some sort of ethnic identity in Africa, because Africans are very linked and attached to their cultures and to their traditions. So that's the first thing. The second thing is about governance, and that had to do with the organizations of elections. I strongly believe that that due to the fact that the federal government of Ethiopia gave a reason that due to COVID they are going to postpone elections, was not something that looked very, very fair, considering the fact that in the Tigray region they went on to organize their own elections and it went on well. So we are seeing here that might be there was some sort of abuse of power, in the sense that those in power wanted to use an opportunity that was at stake or at hand to be able to prolong their term in office. So immediately you will see that in this type of situation there's some sort of bad governance, because when you want to govern, you have to take into consideration every other person's point of view, and by doing that, you will be able to bring people to a compromise, and together, if people accept on something, then that thing will take place normally. So you see that in this case, automatically, we can say that the Tigray people were disgruntled due to the fact that the president, or sorry, the Prime Minister Abiy decided to postpone the elections. Now, the last thing is that might be the Tigray People's Liberation Front were automatically disgruntled due to the fact that they had been in power for over 27 years and they were not ready to accept that they had lost power, and that they would just be reduced to handling matters that are being associated with the member state of which they are. So looking at all these different issues, the mediation will have to do with these things, and if we have to build trust, it therefore means that all these issues will have to be put on the table, and each person will have to explain his or herself or give his or her reasons And from there, trust will be able to be built, and the two parties will be able to come to a compromise.
Definitely, that's what even those in the Tigrayan region are actually expecting. You earlier mentioned or evoked the issue of the humanitarian crisis, which is something that, according to the United Nations, has really elevated in that part of Africa. Now, could Addis Ababa be blamed for or blamed directly for the ongoing crisis that is taking place in Tigray?
Well, it's quite complicated. The blame cannot be total. I believe the blame should be partial.
Yes.
Because, as I said, the government had a vision, and the vision was to probably stop ethnic federalism, which I think was not the best approach. Secondly, the government had to organize elections, which were being planned for August 2020, but they postponed it to sometime in 2021, which I believe that they were supposed to seek other means or try to use other methods to be able to bring the other states, and especially the state of Tigray, to understand and to bear their reason for postponing this election. So, due to the fact that these are the reasons why the Tigray people are disgruntled and they are fighting, we can say that the Addis Ababa government, or the federal state or the federal government, played or influenced partially the ongoing of this conflict. But nevertheless, due to the fact that the federal government actually made some of these errors in quotes, does not actually mean that the Tigray people were supposed to take the laws into their hands and to start fighting against the Ethiopian National Defense Force. And due to that, the Ethiopian federal government had to respond according to the constitution to be able to stop the conflict. So, in a way, the blame goes on both sides. The Ethiopian federal government was supposed to carry out things in a democratic way as stipulated in the constitution that will help parties or help the different states to understand themselves. And more to that, they were supposed to organize elections on time. But that does not also give the right for the Tigray people to go on to attack the Ethiopian National Defense Force, which is an entity of the federal state according to the constitution. So actually they had no right to do that. So the blame actually, for me, it goes both sides.
Definitely, you say one person can never be blamed entirely. But then we have had on several accounts, the United Nations has sent food aid to the affected Ethiopian region, or affected Tigrayan region. And of course, we have had records of some of these convoys being attacked, and definitely has led to the death of several persons in that part of the continent. Now, could we say that the Ethiopian government somehow has been using the food crisis as a weapon of war?
Well, that's a very difficult and complicated question, because we all know that when there is war, there is no rule of law. There is no respect for the rule of law. So people do anything or as they like, and at the end of the day, will certainly see rights and humanitarian rights being violated on a general note. So it was being alleged that when some of these humanitarian aid were sent to Tigray, that either the Tigray soldiers themselves, the Tigray defense force themselves,
they attacked the truck,
the aid, you see, and probably also maybe the Ethiopian National Defense Force also took the aid to help themselves.
And there were also cases, sorry to cut you, sir, but there were also cases recorded of lack of fuel in order for these convoys to reach the necessary people they were destined for. Yes,
of course. You know, on the field, things might really be complicated. You know that Ethiopia is some sort of, it's a big desert there, and of course, having supply chains and having aid getting to particular zones is difficult. But as I earlier on said, things will not obviously be easy in a conflict zone, because probably even a car, even if it has a full tank, certainly cannot cover a certain distance, you see. So if there is a shortage in fuel, automatically that car has to be filled somewhere. And if we are in a conflict zone, it therefore means that businesses are not going on, petrol stations are not probably working. So at the end of the day, most of this aid will not be able to get to their destined positions. So it makes things really difficult. That's why conflicts are not to be encouraged, and it's quite complicated. And at the end of the day, as I said, most of this aid ends up in the hands of the Tigray Defense Force, who decide on how it's going to be shared. So when you look at things critically, might be the Ethiopian Defense Force is also thinking like, okay, if they are sending aid, the aid is not serving the purpose. The aid is instead going to resource those who are fighting against us. So they might do some sort of limitation or sabotage the aid in one way or the other. So that's the problem with conflicts, because with conflicts, there is no respect for the rule of law, and people do as they like. That's why we have a lot of violations of human rights laws, and we see a lot of deaths, we see a lot of famine, we see a lot of violence done on women and on children. So it's really unfortunate.
It's really unfortunate indeed. It's not that we're blaming the Ethiopian government. No, we are blaming the Tigrayan forces. I think every person on the African continent with a Pan-African vision will actually wish for the peace in that affected region, like every other part of the African continent. And now I'd like to ask you this question. In your opinion, why do you think all attempts made to bring about a permanent ceasefire in Ethiopia has actually borne no fruits so far?
I don't think from the start there has been some sort of negotiations that have taken place. I don't really think that a concrete negotiation has taken place. I think what the African Union has proposed looks like one of the really first of its own to bring peace in the region.
Yes, some time ago, sorry to cut you short, some time ago I remember the United Nations had urged Ethiopia, the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan forces to actually broker a ceasefire, which something that never came to reality.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I was trying to put forth. That it's true that it's not only the UN. I think there are other member states that had even tried to encourage the Ethiopian government to organize peace talks and to bring peace in the region. You understand? But you know, when there is a conflict and you have two parties who disagree, you see, and one party who is supposed to be subject to the other party actually claiming his rights and seeing himself as an entity or as a country, it becomes very, very difficult, because the Ethiopian federal government want to play the role of the big brother or the boss, and automatically the Tigray member state will not want to accept that the Ethiopia federal government is playing that role. So it becomes very difficult, because the Ethiopian government wants to use a mechanism which is more authoritative, and in that sense it will not go through the minds of the state of Tigray or the people of Tigray well. So you see, it becomes very, very difficult, and that's why at the end of the day, most of these conflicts are easily resolved by a neutral party. So you need an external party to be able to call on both parties to come to the table of negotiation, and from there that neutral party can mediate between the two. But if you expect a dispute to be resolved by both parties in an amicable way without the help of a third party, most of the time it's very, very difficult, because first of all, they don't understand themselves, they don't trust themselves, and they believe that the other person has been violating their rights. So it becomes very, very difficult, and that's why you see it was easier for the African Union to take upon its responsibilities and its obligations to bring peace, equality and dignity in Africa, to be able to call on both parties to the negotiation table. And as we can see, due to that approach which the African Union was able to put forth, they were able to bring both parties to agree to come on the mediation table. And for me, this is something very wonderful. And if it actually really takes place, then it will be the first of its kind, and it will be a principle that will have to be used to resolve further disputes in Africa. Because we know that most disputes in Africa are not being, or when the parties in conflict are being called upon the table, they don't usually involve the party who seems to be violating the law more, who seems to have, in quote, that title of a rebel or the terrorist. And that makes negotiation and mediation in Africa very difficult, and that's why we don't yet have peace. But if the African Union is able to bring the Tigray leaders on the table and also bring the federal government of Ethiopia leaders on the table, then that will really be wonderful. And we hope that that is what should take place, and that at the end of the day, they should come to a compromise and that peace should reign in that region.
That's very important. You evoked once again the issue of trust between both parties, the Ethiopian government and the Tigrayan People's Liberation Front. And now, how can this issue of trust among both sides be managed?
Yeah, that the issue of trust will have to be managed by the mediator. So the mediator, who is the African Union, will have to make use of mediation process principles, and that will be aimed at listening to both parties equitably, both parties producing different evidence and proofs to actually support their allegations, and then organizing single session or private session with each parties to help them come to a compromise. So the mediator will have a very great role to play here, and if the mediator is able to put these principles into practice, then automatically the mediator will be able to build trust between the two, because the aim of the mediation is for the parties to come to a compromise. It's for the parties to agree that, okay, we are going to cease fire, we are going to come to a peace settlement, and that we are going to look forward in establishing better relationships between us. So that will be the aim of the mediator, and the mediator will really have to be tactful in this case, and the mediator will also have to advise, especially the federal government of Ethiopia, to come not as a governing authority, but to come as a person and to see itself equal as the people of Tigray. If they are able to establish equality between both parties, and that both parties actually respect themselves and don't see themselves either higher or inferior to each other, then that compromise will be able to be met easily. And that is one of the issues with our leaders in Africa. Our leaders in Africa always take leadership authoritatively, and that actually makes most of the people or the population to be frustrated. I think that we have to change the approach of leadership in Africa, and that even though leaders have been conferred power by the population or through the constitution to govern the population, they have to do it with all respect to the basic principles of human rights, which has to do with respecting the person, giving him dignity, and permitting him to be able to apply the principle of self-determination. So I think that if the mediator work on these principles, if the mediator actually advises the parties perfectly well, then automatically they will be able to come to a compromise, and there will be a ceasefire and peace in Ethiopia.
Indeed. Just to reiterate that about a month ago, the TPLF forces definitely said they were ready for any AU or African Union-led peace talks that were going to be brought forth. And of course, these peace talks are finally here. And as of now, these peace talks that are supposed to take place this weekend, the TPLF forces are yet to actually confirm whether they're going to take part or not. Now, looking at the outcomes and the role of the mediator, which is the African Union, as you earlier reiterated at the beginning of this conflict, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed went to the front with the sole intention of bringing back peace to his country, bringing back peace to the people's liberation, from bringing back peace to the Tigrayan region. But of course, this never came to reality. Now, how can both parties actually find a neutral ground that is going to bring about lasting peace in Ethiopia's Tigray region? Not just Ethiopia's Tigray region, but we are looking at the affected Amhara and Afar regions too.
Yeah, exactly. As I earlier on said, it's not easy to actually resolve such issues. And what the Ethiopian Prime Minister is doing now is that he has to do his best to bring peace in the region, because peace has no price, and without peace things cannot move well. He also understands that Ethiopia is a federal state, and when there is a conflict with one state, the other states, it might actually contaminate the other states, and that might actually lead to political instability and dissolution of the state. So him coming now to resolve this issue and look for means to bring peace in the region is actually a very good move. But now the problem is the manner in which he wants to do it. The problem with most of our African presidents is that when they don't think in the future, so they usually make mistakes, and when mistakes lead to conflicts, they try to use other means, or they try to seek for a peace negotiation by methods which are not really accepted by the other party. The fact that a president or a prime minister, a leader, is seeking for peace is not enough. The manner in which he does it is what is important, and that is why the leader has to go back to the root causes of the problem. So if the root cause, as I earlier on said, is that he wanted to stop ethnic federalism, and that one of the states is not in agreement with that, he has to go back to that and say, no, okay, I realize that I made an error on trying to stop ethnic federation, but okay, I made an error and we are not going to go back to that. So if he goes back and realizes that the issue started with the fact that he did not organize elections as was earlier planned, he has to go back on that and say, no, I'm sorry, I was supposed to organize elections on August 2020, but I did not do that. I'm sorry, please, we are going to organize it this time or this given moment. And if he is able to do that, then things will go back to normal. But the issue is that he will want to seek a peace settlement or a pacific settlement without going back to the root cause. And that is the issue we have with most of our African conflicts. Our leaders don't want to go back to the root cause and acknowledge that they made an error. So if he does not, since he did not acknowledge that he made an error, automatically that is why we still have the conflict still going on, because he's behaving like everything he did before was correct, whereas what he did before has in one way or the other violated maybe the rights of the Tigray people, which he does not want to acknowledge. So automatically, why should the Tigray people want to come to a peace settlement with him when he is not even acknowledging that he has hurt them in one way or the other? So the manner in which our leaders try to resolve an issue is very, very important. And that is why most of the time conflicts in Africa keep on persisting and persisting over decades. It's because our leaders use the wrong approach. Sometimes they have to be pushed to the wall to be able to accept certain things and to be able to come and seek peace, which is wrong. They have to think ahead of time, make sure that they don't commit these errors, and if at all they commit these errors, they are supposed to tell the population that they went wrong and that they are going to resolve it in this way. If you don't do that, then automatically peace will not reign in the area. Nowadays the principles of human rights, the inherent principles of human rights are so inherent to human beings and human beings are actually in the world are so conscious of these human rights that they naturally fight for them. So if we don't respect the basic human rights of others, then automatically it will be difficult for us to resolve issues. If we don't give them dignity, if we don't respect them, if we don't listen to their views, then automatically it will be difficult to resolve issues. And that is why we keep on having conflict. So I think that is a reason why his previous moves were not actually efficient. It is because he did not want to accept that he had done wrong. He did not want to accept that the government who is being led by him had done wrong in one way or the other to the Tigray people. And I think that this is what the mediator, during the mediation, will have to help the government of Ethiopia to understand. Because if they don't understand this, it will never lead to peace. Even if they use the military might they have today to crush the Tigray people, but that will stay in the hearts of the Tigray people. And in the next generation, the same crisis will still resurge because a solution and a proper solution was not gotten at the right time. So that is my opinion about the question you asked.
Since the beginning of this program, we have been highlighting the role of the mediator, which is the African Union, in order for it to bring about peace in Ethiopia's Tigray region. Now, what do you think the African Union needs to correct for peace this time around to reign?
So actually, the African Union has a very great role to play in the political stability in Africa, to play in the development of Africa, and to most especially play a great role in the governance systems of our different African countries. And I think that is where the African Union has to lay a lot of emphasis. In Africa, we need more democratic and republic regimes. Most of our African countries today are being organized into authoritative regimes, which actually are regimes which violate a lot of human rights principles. So the African Union has to work a lot to promote good governance, to promote the type of governance that will integrate the respect, the dignity, and the self-determination of the people, to permit the people to be able to express themselves, and that these things should not only be on paper, but that they should be practical. So the African Union has to go about it by organizing projects, by organizing activities and different protocols that they will require member states of the African Union to ratify and abide according to them, so that they will be able to implement these different types of good governance practices in our different African states, so that the next generations that will come, the next generations of leaders, will understand the basic principles of human rights, will understand the basic principles of governance, and in that way will be able to fight and resolve so many conflicts that we are now having in Africa. So the African Union has somehow been seen as the backing dog, just as the United Nations concerning international disputes. But I think that if the right approach is being used by the African Union, they will be able to put everybody on the table. The approach is not an approach of being authoritative, but it's an approach that should be comprehensive, treating everybody equal and helping each party to understand the benefits that will come with good governance, the benefits that will come with good practices, the benefits that will come with the respect of human rights, laws, and conventions. And that, of course, will be able to unite African leaders, will be able to make African leaders to carry out their government activities in a way that will always bring stability in Africa. We have to know that instability in Africa is a serious problem that is hindering growth and hindering development. And we all know that there are so many African countries that are suffering today from famine and other issues, and environmental issues, political issues. So we have to look for a way to be able to assist all these African countries, and we can only do that in unity. So the African Union has to put in place good mechanisms that will bring peace and stability in Africa, and by that way they'll be able to develop Africa better, create more roads that will link countries, so that there should be good supply chains, and that goods, services, even food can live from countries that have more than enough to African countries that has less. So the African Union really has a great role to play, and they have to take this as a very great task in actually bringing all African countries and all their member states to respect the rule of law, to respect human rights conventions, and I think at the end of the day we'll have a better Africa.
A better Africa indeed. Of course, it's often said that different African countries do have different problems, and just Africans can resolve their problems because we are the keys to various problems. We have the solutions in our palms. Now, what role, we're now talking away from the African Union, what role do Africans, we're talking of individual African countries, have to play in the resolution of conflicts in different nations that are affected?
Well, the roles African states have to play is that we know each party has a role. We just talked about that of the African Union, but the states and the population or individuals in a particular state also have a role to play. The state, first of all, has to make sure that they respect all the different international principles that have to do with governance and have to do with the respect of human rights. The states have to, first of all, understand that national security and peace in a nation is dependent on the way they govern the nation, is dependent on how they treat people, is dependent on how they carry out different government activities, is dependent on how there is respect for human rights. So they have to be reminded that they first of all have this role to play, and that not only should they play this role in their different countries, but they can also serve as advisors to other African states who are not actually respecting the human rights conventions and who are not governing well. We all know that governance has several dimensions, and if these dimensions are not being respected, automatically we can't really talk about peace in Africa. We can't talk about good governance, and we'll have more instability. And these different dimensions, we talk about accountability, we talk about political stability and lack of violence, we talk about government effectiveness, we talk about the regulation of quality, we talk about the respect of the rule of law, which for me I think is the most important, and we also talk about the lack of corruption. So African states have to make sure that they respect these principles and that they themselves can serve as advice to other African states. Now, for the population, the state also has to bear in mind that the population might not be well educated to master certain principles governing human rights. And you realize today that most of our African populations, they have a way to respond to bad governance and to respond to authoritative regimes. They usually respond with violence. And I think that it is the role of the state to put in place mechanisms to be able to educate the population. So from primary schools, secondary schools, the state is supposed to put in place subjects that have to deal with human rights and help the people understand that even if there is a problem, there is a particular way in which they have to react, because the consequences of violence are this and this and this. And at the end of the day, nobody is the winner, because we were all lost in one way or the other. People will die, there will be violation of women's rights, violation of children's rights, there will be issues with education, feeding, health. So all those issues will be consequences of the actions of each and everyone. So the states have to actually help the people understand these things, and that is the role, one of the primary roles the state has to play, to educate the population so that the population has a good idea about the consequences of the violence which they can undertake. By doing this, we will create a society, they will create a society that is very stable, that will be more comprehensive. They themselves making sure that they carry out their obligations so that they don't actually violate the rights of the population. So that is how we can come about it, and individual Africans should be conscious of the fact that we have a continent to protect, we have a nation to protect, and that we always have to make sure that peace should reign. No matter the circumstance, peace should always reign. And that is the way we have to go about things, not violence, but always seeking to have a peaceful negotiation so that at the end of the day, we can preserve peace in our different nations.
Preserve peace in our different nations. To wrap up today's edition of Voice It, of course, we are still discussing the Ethiopian Tigrayan crisis. Of course, the last question I'll be asking you, your capacity as an African and as a lawyer or a legal expert, what should we expect from this AU-led peace process that is supposed to take place this weekend?
Yeah, as I earlier said, the process is first of all a good start. The fact that the Tigray people, the Liberation Front, have decided to sit on the table, and the Ethiopian government, because if I have good memory, about a month ago, the Tigray People's Liberation Front was ready to go on the table, but the Ethiopian government had not yet accepted. Yes. But if now the Ethiopian government has accepted, then that is a very good thing, and it's a very good start. But now the negotiation would depend on the capacity of the mediator, because that is where everything will play. The mediator should be able to instruct the parties, advise the parties in such a way that they will be able to reach the compromise. So the fact that they are going for mediation does not obviously mean that things will go on well. We have seen several cases where mediations were organized, but things did not actually go on well as expected. So that is an outcome that we cannot predict. And I believe that the outcome of this mediation will be solely dependent on the capacity and the qualities that the mediator will put forth during the mediation. It's very, very vital. So the mediator will have a lot of qualities to put into practice, and if he does that perfectly well, then automatically the two parties will be able to come to a compromise, and of course we shall have peace. The mediator will always have to bear in mind that the main thing that has to be put forth are the respect of human rights. It is the respect of Article 1 of the Human Rights Convention of 1948, which has to do with the respect of the person and the right to self-determination. The right to self-determination is a very, very important right. It's the right that even makes a nobody to think that he is somebody in face of a state or any other person. And that's why you see today people can stand against states. An individual can stand against a state because he's expressing that right of self-determination. So the mediator will really have to remind the government of Ethiopia that it is talking to another person, and that person has rights, that person has dignity, that person also has a right to self-determination. So if he's able to do that and make the Ethiopian government understand this, then of course that will bring the Ethiopian government to realize and to accept certain errors that he made, to ask for forgiveness, and automatically I believe that with that demand for forgiveness, the Tigray people will be able to forgive and to move on, because sometimes humility is just what is needed to move on, to show the other person that you are another human being. We respect your views, we respect your self-determination, but let's work together. We made this error, we shall see things in a different way. And I think by doing things that way, the problem will be resolved, and we'll have peace in Ethiopia.
Thank you so much. We definitely pray for peace. I would like to say thank you so much, Dr. Asong, for joining us on today's edition of Voice It.